Hello students, and welcome to the second half of the course. I'm Professor Krochmal. This is ICM 501, Learning Module number 9. So to begin with, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we go forward. The focus now becomes tighter, and you're expected to have learned how to perform in this class, turning in clean copy with bibliographies, annotations, and do work that really reflects that you have done some critical thinking, you've done your research, you cite what you need to, and that's pretty much everything needs to be cited, and you want to not only do your assignments but also participate to a bigger level on VoiceThread. So if you don't make comments on your students, your fellow students' work, you need to. And also, I am available to you, so let's get a chance, set up a conference call or a Skype. We can talk a little bit about your performance and how you can go forward. So I'm looking forward to those opportunities to really get to talk to you guys a little bit different and more interactively than this medium allows. So let's get started. Let's begin with a paper posted on academia.edu, which is the social network for academics. Vilma Leoma Aho is a professor of organizational communications and PR at Jyväskylä University School of Business and Economics in Finland. And I'm sure I have messed up the names, so that's why it's written there for you. She is a professor of organizational communications and PR, and this paper uploaded to academia.edu in 2010 has attracted over 10,000 views, so it indicates it's a pretty good overview. The paper examines the effect of digital development on the concepts of communication, public relations, and journalism. It analyzes theories of mass communications and suggests new ideas. I'd like for you to examine the paper. The link is underneath and it'll be available on the slide deck. Take a look at it and note the author's discussion of traditional communications theory, perhaps the most important aspect of this work. The professor starts by examining some traditional modes, and she starts with journalism and journalists, who she says are gatekeepers to the public's attention. News and production and control no longer go together in this new environment. Journalism is production of news stories, bringing public attention to issues of public interest. Social media is writing and broadcasting by the people, and you'll hear this again, the people formerly known as the audience. Remember that, and we'll come back to it. People get their news from the internet and publish their opinions in real time to mass audiences via social media, producing digital mass self-communication networks. And that is a change. All right, on the next slide, I'm going to take some time to go through this slide, and we'll talk about each of the theories that are listed here that the good professor put in her paper. First, there's the formation of public opinion. And the change is no longer is public opinion dependent on the press and its point of view, but various players can now contribute to how an opinion is formed. So that's the theory of formation of public opinion. Then there is the two-step flow of information. This was first introduced by Paul Lazarsfeld, Bernard Berelson, and Hazel Gaudet in 1944. The idea that media has an influence on people's behavior, but it's limited by opinion leaders, people who initially consume media content, interpret it in light of their own values and beliefs, and then pass it on to opinion followers who have less frequent contact with media. New opinion makers are now emerging through this digital environment. Agenda setting is the ability of the media to influence the importance of topics on the public agenda. Citizen journalists and accidental citizen journalists can shape and mold agendas faster than legacy media. People are gathering their information from professional and unprofessional sources. Then we have the great name for this, the spiral of silence. Originally proposed by German political scientist Elisabeth Noel Neumann in 1974, the spiral of silence is a term meant to refer to the tendency of people to remain silent when they feel their views are in opposition to the majority view on a subject. People now share opinions more easily and, importantly, anonymously, but having an online presence doesn't guarantee wide public support. Then we have the theory of media richness, which was created by Daft, Lengel, and Trevino in 1987. This theory is focused on how well certain media can reproduce certain messages. And for an example, face-to-face communication could be described as a very rich media, where a website could be seen as more of a lean media. But new media are making cold media, like a cold website, more effective. Then we have the theories of relationship management. Relationship management aims to create a partnership between the organization and its audience rather than consider the relationship merely transactional. There's the notion of feedback, the way in which social actors constantly adapt their language and behaviors to one another. Real-time interaction that we have in the digital environment now can create a platform for the dream of real dialogue. Then you should understand stakeholder theory. A stakeholder is any person or organization that affects or can be affected by an organization, such as employees, shareholders, consumers, suppliers, the government, and the community. Organizations are no longer in the center of communication networks, but have to find the arenas where stakeholders and potential stakeholders are already discussing the issues that are relevant to them. Professor Lauma Aho introduces the new theories in the field. One interests me, and it should you: foreverism. The many ways that consumers and businesses are embracing conversations, relationships, and products that are never done, as technology allows them to find, follow, interact, and collaborate forever with anyone and anything. You might also remember this as the long tail. Crisis communication is no longer just Olivia Pope's arena on Scandal, but it's an everyday thing, as social media makes things pop very quickly and have to be handled by professionals, such as Olivia. Then there's the idea of issue arenas. This evolves stakeholder theory and brings to fore such skills as monitoring, listening, and participating. You'll find and you'll hear these more often. These are some of the skills that are needed to be able to find these arenas where people are discussing things that are of interest or important to organizations or individuals. Finding and measuring the importance of different arenas is a critical skill. So now we have attention workers who are expanding on relationship building, evoking awareness to attention, which is focused mental engagement on a particular item of information. In an attention economy, and we've talked about that before, these positions include journalism, public relations, marketing, advertising, and lobbying. Then there's the woofie. Cory Doctorow introduced this concept in his novel Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. It's a world where everyone has basic food and shelter, so how does commerce happen? Economic life revolved around reputation as currency. This is a short insight into reputation online, which we will discuss in an upcoming module. So the professor introduces the idea of the role of attention workers, those who professionally generate and broker attention. And it's argued that this is central for the new environment where, as we've talked about before, it's an attention economy. So I would recommend you click the link and read the article, spend some time with it. It'll give you background on theory, some of the new theories that are coming out, and how understanding theoretically how this new digital environment is working for communications. So there's some people who believe that the audience is dead. And maybe one of the people who helped kill at least the notion of the audience is Jay Rosen, a friend of mine and a professor at NYU. And I would recommend that you click the article on the slide deck, It'll also be in the learning module. And read a little bit what he said when he came out with this idea. He publishes a blog called Presslink, and he also published this piece in the Huffington Post as a blogger, an independent blogger, and he put it out there. And while you're reading it, think about the tone. Who's addressing? Who is the audience for this? And what is the conclusion? So let's meet Professor Jay Rose.
Journalism. Lots of people want to know what citizen journalism is. Well, I'm going to tell you. When the people, formerly known as the audience, employ the press tools in their possession to inform one another, that's citizen journalism. Got it?
What do you make of this headline? Newspaper digital audience grew twice as fast as the internet in the past 12 months. This is new data that was released in October by the Newspaper Association of America, a trade group, of course. From the release, the digital audience engaged with newspaper content reached a new peak in August 2015, totaling 179.3 million adult unique visitors. The count is a 10% increase in adult unique visitors measured by ComScore since August 2014 and is double the growth rate for the internet overall, which is 5%. The growth, the organization said, is derived from the explosive growth of mobile devices. Half of the newspaper's digital audience is composed of those who only use mobile devices, smartphones or tablets, to consume their newspaper digital content. 8 in 10 of the newspaper mobile audience uses smartphones exclusively for access. Which theories in the previous segment apply to this? Think about it. And think critically. What is missing and what is relevant to these numbers? Digital advertising revenue. For all media, digital advertising revenue growth was 5% compared to the same period in 2014. So now let's look a little bit at measurements, measuring the audience. And any conversation about measurement has to start with Nielsen. Nielsen has ruled the TV audience measurement business since 1950 when it launched the Nielsen Television Index and Audience Measurement Service. In 1973, it offered national daily TV ratings, then the People Meter, which added demographic daily data to the daily ratings. Now Nielsen is prepared to launch Total Audience Measurement, a 2-year effort to better measure today's fractured television audience. Michael Wolff is a longtime media curmudgeon and an author who writes a column for USA Today. He wrote about ratings when Nielsen competitor ComScore, which he had just mentioned, announced it would acquire Rentrax in October. And this is what he wrote. But in the competition with digital media, which uses different measurement standards, and the shift to new screens and platforms without reliable or willing measurement protocols, measurement has come unstuck. So it's Michael Wolff's contention that television measurements are part of what is causing this uncertainty with the industry, the television industry, where this summer we saw a deep dive in TV stocks and analysts and media correspondents saying that television watching is imperiled. Actually, Michael Wolff is a big fan of TV as a business, but it's the metrics that he has a problem with. And he also mentioned digital metrics. So let's take a look at that side of the equation. Alan Mutter is a former newspaper executive on the West Coast who runs this very popular blog, and it's really an industry blog for people who are in the media, specifically newspapers, and he looks at the economics. So let's take a look at a recent column of his and walk through the blog and understand some of the terms that are used. This will be helpful. In the digital world, the promise is that everything can be and should be measured. But what metrics matter? Here are the basics. The number of individuals visiting a destination, There's really no way to know exactly how many because of the matrix of devices and browsers we all use. The counts are too high. 5 times, says ComScore, which projects numbers based on its statistical methods. Then we have page views. That's the number of pages served, and that works within the construct of traditional print and broadcast media, but does it really address the digital world? Subject to boosting with new content or other hanky-panky on the back end, is a page viewed, really viewed? That's the question. Then we have social media shares, where increasing friends and followers, but you also want to maximize shares. Word of mouth is the most valuable form of advertising, but where is the correlation between shares and what is actually read? There's none, says Chartbeat, which is a New York-based company that creates real-time dashboards for publishers to see how their content is trending in real time. What's really good, a lot of publications use it to try to promote on social when something is trending during the daytime or when they're looking at it. Here's something to remember. If you see somebody tweet an article, it likely means they either didn't really read it or they read every word, and you don't know, and that's credited to The Verge. Then we have the metrics of ad click-through. That's somebody actually clicked on an ad because they wanted to see the content, wanted to find out more. 61% of ad clicks were suspicious, says Solve Media. Too high? Maybe. Regardless, click-through is not seen as highly accurate, but what else have we got? Well, there's time on site. Is this the most important metric? Average time on Facebook is 30 minutes per session against 3 minutes per session at a typical newspaper site. The platform Medium says it has a method to infer more accurately when a reader is actually interacting with the content. Others, like Samsung, are focusing on eye tracking technology, seeing what is being seen on the screens. Then there's total attention measurement. Chartbeat is charting this for newsrooms. Upworthy measures scrolls, video watching, all to try to get a more accurate approach to the ultimate holy grail that we have in digital, that everything is measurable. What would you accurately measure? There's a saying in business, Tonstapel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Well, if you haven't thought about it, maybe you should think about it. If you're not paying for it, maybe what's being sold is you as a product. Let's examine that. The chart here shows revenue per monthly active user for both Facebook and Twitter. So that's a way of measuring how much money they make for each and everybody who's an active user on a monthly basis. That number itself is kind of iffy, as we've seen with other things, but it's one way to measure how you are being bought and sold, and we'll go into that a little bit more. Dallas Walker Smythe, a Canadian economics scholar, developed the idea of the audience commodity. He posited that all non-sleeping time is work time. Work time is production time. Time away from work, but not asleep, is sold as a commodity to advertisers. The audience is a commodity, and media is funded by buying and selling the audience. The difference between the audience commodity on traditional mass media and on the internet is that in the latter, the users are also content producers. There's user-generated content. The users engage in permanent creative activity, communication, community building, and content production. Let's take a listen to some of what Dr. Smythe's thoughts are on the audience as a commodity.
First, what function do the mass media perform for capitalism? Answer, they set an agenda for the production of consciousness and ideology for the two purposes of mass marketing, the output of mass-produced consumer goods and services by the use of audience power working for consciousness industry. And two, the mass marketing of the practices of the capitalist state, elections, political programs, foreign policy, so forth and so on. and giving them legitimacy. Recall to your mind the fact that Richard Milhous Nixon said in 1957 that a candidate for public office has to be merchandised just like cigarettes or soap. You see the essential unity of the process on the political side, where you're dealing with the electoral process, and on the consumption side, where you're dealing with commodities. Secondly, what is the principal product of the mass media under monopoly capitalism? It's audience power. It's not the programs, it's not the editorial content. Why do the mass media produce audience power? Well, they sell it to advertisers in order to make money for themselves out of the sale of the audiences. Why do advertisers buy audience power? Because it's the only conceivable way that they could mass market the output of the mass production of consumer goods and services. Tupperware parties, door-to-door, mail-order houses, and so forth just couldn't do the job. People have got to market things to themselves. We were hung up at the end of the hour on the question of do audience members work? I was giving you an ambiguous answer to it, and I still have to. It's not clear what would. Sure, they work, but what's the nature of the work? How does it relate to their child-rearing problems and practices? How does it relate to their mating activity, their sex activity? How does it relate to the production of their energy so that they can work tomorrow and work next week? All of these questions are very problematic. We do know they work. Just what the work amounts to, when it's done, is not clear yet. We do know that the payoff comes when you go to the retail outlet and you've got either a short list or a long list of things to buy, or you've got a mental set which permits you to act as consciousness industry prefers you act, without a list, and merely as a suggestible person who buys on impulse. But in that case, the length of your list is more or less limited by the thickness of your pocketbook, or the depth of your bank account, or whether or not you can borrow any more money from the credit union or good old ABCO. So there is a limit somewhere to the amount you can buy even on impulses. Maybe not today, but in the long run. So how do things get selected? Well, if it's impulsively on impulse buying, of course, obviously it's a non-rational process. If it's ostensibly a rational process, then I suggested that at this stage of the work, it is a matter of acting rationally to limit the number of decisions you have to make. So you put down, I want Palmolive soap or whatever. You don't say, I'm going to compare all the brands of soap for quality and price per unit and decide which one is the best buy. If you did that, you'd be back in the trap of using all your time and more than the knowledge that you could possibly have to make rational decisions. So as Linder, the Swedish economist, said, it's rational to limit your time spent in making these purchasing decisions, but the decisions themselves are irrational. So what it amounts to is a rationale, being rational about irrationality, which is a very accurate summation of the contradiction that takes place.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Smythe from a lecture in 1979, but I think some of the ideas still hold place. And that was at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Now, one more thing. There's just one more thing you need to know. That's the 1% rule. And it's not the 1% that have 100% of all the value, but it's the 1% in human behavior online. Let's take a look.
I'm Ben Brooks. I often get asked about online communities, in particular MarshU, and how well we're doing. What are KPIs or metrics that would indicate we're successful? How many bloggers do we have, or how many sparks are we getting? How many comments do we have? How many logons? Well, we have 25,000 colleagues, and so sometimes people will say, well, shouldn't we have 25,000 blogs? Well, an important rule to understand is 99.1. Yep, that's 100. 90% of people in an online community typically are what's called lurkers. Actually, recently I was in China, and I found out they call them divers there, like they dive underwater and they never come up. These are people that, they log on to a site like Facebook. They'll scroll through the whole thing, they'll look through the photo albums, and they'll look at other people's walls, and then they'll click and log off. Don't say a thing. Now, 9% of people, that's the 90%, 9% of people are passive contributors. So they might get on and look at your photo album on Facebook, and they'll thumbs up and like a photo or put a brief comment in. And they're the folks that they're giving a little contribution. 1% of people are active contributors. Typically only 1% of an online community is an active contributor. They're the kind that are generating the whole photo album. They're blogging, they're creating videos, and they're the folks that everyone is actually talking about their content. So when you think about that online community, very few people are actually contributing from a content generation perspective, but lurking is learning. We like lurkers. Lurkers are learning. They're consuming the content. And the passive contributors are very important, because that active contributor, if you keep generating and sharing content, but it's out there in the ether and it's like, is anyone listening? It's really, really disconcerting. And so you need the feedback loop from the passive contributors to say, that's great, or what about this? Have you thought about that? Or a like, anything, to let people know that people are listening, to let people know that there's an audience.
I'd love to know on Blackboard where you see yourself. And that'll go to this week's assignment, where you're taking a look at your participation and taking an analysis and finding influencers and applying some of the theories that we worked so hard to present over the last 25 minutes or so. Please look on Blackboard, contribute to VoiceThread, and the discussion forum for the class is open. Send me an email, ping me, let's talk, and I look forward to seeing your work for the week, and we'll be getting your papers back to you just as quickly as we can. Have a good week. Talk to you soon.